We must build our hard power, because that is the currency of the age.
Auch wir, die Europäer, treffen unsere Vorkehrungen. Wir treffen unsere Vorkehrungen für diese neue Zeit.
Europe is massively rearming. Europe has to learn to become a geopolitical power.
And yes, if necessary, we must be ready to fight.
These are the three most unpopular leaders in Western Europe, and they're asking their populations to prepare for a war with Russia. They made their case at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend, where they were widely applauded by fellow politicians. But can they convince their own people?
I will be there, yeah. Who are we fighting anyway?
Yeah, why not? Absolutely.
They should forget about sending people out to war and actually look at the tax rate.
Well, more from them in a moment, but first a quick look at what Europe's leaders are saying.
Russia is a constant threat, not just now, but into the future.
If we reach a settlement on Ukraine, we will still have to contend with an aggressive Russia.
In the era of great power rivalry, even the United States will not be powerful enough to go it alone.
We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is, what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for abstractions. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending.
We must build our hard power, because that is the currency of the age. We are moving to warfighting readiness as the central purpose of our armed forces. This government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War.
When I became NATO Secretary General last year, I warned that what is happening in Ukraine could happen to allied countries too, that we had to shift to a wartime mindset.
Europe has to learn to become a geopolitical power.
So they want to create a European military capable of taking on the biggest war machines in the world. Can they do it? Here's a quick comparison with the current military superpowers. We'll look at four categories: nuclear weapons, aircraft carriers, active personnel, and we'll start with defence spending. And European countries lag behind the global heavyweights. In 2024, Germany spent nearly 94 billion on defence, which is 2% of its GDP, a guideline set by NATO in 2014, which was met by all member states for the first time only last year. The Germans were closely followed by the United Kingdom at $90.5 billion, France with $66.5 billion, Italy with $48 billion. And then we have Poland, which is spending the most as a percentage of its GDP with $44 billion. But even the total of these European countries is dwarfed by the United States, close to $1 trillion. Its closest rivals, Russia and China, some way behind. Russia, now a war economy, is at a massive 10%. Our second category, active duty personnel, and in Europe, this has been dwindling. France leads with 264,000, closely followed by Poland at 250,000. Germany ranks third, Italy fourth, and trailing behind is the UK with just over 131,000. It's Britain's smallest army since the Napoleonic Wars. All easily outdone in terms of manpower by China with 2 million active personnel, followed by the United States at 1.32 million and Russia with 1.3 million. Our third category, aircraft carrier, the ultimate symbol of naval strength. The United Kingdom and Italy both operate 2 aircraft carriers that are conventionally powered, while France has just one, but it's nuclear powered. Spain also has one that is conventionally powered. The United States dwarfs them all with its fleet of 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. China is second with 3 active non-nuclear carriers, and Russia's sole carrier is also non-nuclear and is sidelined by long-term repairs and currently non-operational. Our final category, nuclear weapons. 9 countries possess them. From the European powers, only France and the UK have nuclear warheads, 515 combined. The United States maintains a total inventory of around 5,177, while Russia holds about 5,459. In third place, China with 600 in its nuclear arsenal. But China is growing its arsenal faster than any other country, building an estimated 10 new nuclear weapons every month. Beijing reportedly aims to have 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030. Well, joining us today we have David Des Roches, a former Pentagon official, Marko Gasic, an international affairs analyst, and finally we have Richard Gill, a former British Army officer who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Welcome to the programme, everyone. David Des Roches, if I may start with you, is this really Europe's priority right now, to prepare for a war with Russia?
Well, Donald Rumsfeld's formulation of old Europe, which is the pre-1989 Europe, and new Europe, the Europeans who were basically colonized by the Soviets, is useful here. It is the priority for new Europe. Old Europe seems to want to do the bare minimum, preserve their social welfare network and trade relations above all, placate the Trump administration and hope to ride this out and ride out the immediate crisis. But even there, you're starting to see a realization that the peace dividend has been taken far too long and has led to a key decline in national characteristics, which basically the idea of European strategic autonomy doesn't exist right now. So I think it's becoming more of a priority across all of Europe.
And more specifically, David, there are a number of Western politicians who predict war with Russia within 5 years. Do you agree with that?
Well, we already are at war with Russia. It's just that it's being fought by the Ukrainians on Ukrainian soil. The Poles are perhaps, along with the 3 Baltic republics, are the most clear-eyed about this. They've basically said, look, the logic that Putin has deployed in Ukraine applies to us as well. And so, we need to fight as far forward. It's particularly telling when you look at the Finns who, have been neutral since the end of World War II, studiedly neutral, and the Swedes who had 400 years of neutrality. They recognized the threat to their national existence and did what, quite frankly, when I worked NATO affairs in the Pentagon, I thought I'd never see. They went and joined NATO. So this is viewed as an existential threat by much of Europe, but unfortunately, the farther away from Russia you are, the less serious it's
exactly right. So the NATO member Lithuania, which borders Russia, well, they say they have good reason to fear them. And here's their foreign minister.
On the Russian side, the intent was very clearly stated to us at the end of 21. They want the NATO being destroyed and dismantled. They want infrastructure to being sent back to the borders of 97. They want Americans out with all their capabilities, including nuclear capabilities from Europe. And they are working on this specific goal. That's not only about Ukraine.
Marko, would you agree that Lithuania, and indeed the rest of Europe, has a lot to fear from Russia?
I think that the Russian bogey for Europe is useful, not so much in terms of geopolitics, but in terms of internal politics. It seems that a fear of Russia is being stoked to persuade people to pay for the decline in their living standards, to be feared into agreeing to the loss of their freedoms in their countries, and to justify the incredibly bad policies of their leaders, which have led them into this economic difficulty that they're finding themselves in. So Russia is really, there is no evidence whatsoever that Russia wants to move anywhere else than where it is already, apart from the Donbass itself and areas of Ukraine. There is no evidence to suggest anything else. But what there is a huge campaign on the part of people who are determined to frighten a population which knows very little about the facts. And one of the big WMD kind of deceits is this figure of 5 years to a war. That's been plucked out of the air. It's plucked out to sound as if Keir Starmer and others have got some information that the rest of us haven't got. Well, they haven't. That isn't a war that's going to start by Russia. It'll be starting, if it does, from Europe's own negligence.
Thank you. Richard, political expediency, or is this a real national security assessment?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think both commentators there's an element of truth in that. Is Russia engaged in low conflict with the UK and other parts of Europe? Undoubtedly it is. It's testing our air defence systems regularly. It's sponsoring terrorism across Europe. But should we be focusing our attention on fighting Russia within 5 years? Well, I really hope not. I hope there's something diplomatically we can do to prevent that. And I get the point. We are fighting a hot war on the eastern frontier of Europe, and that I would like to see that end.
David, let's move on to the second question. Is it actually possible for Europe to become a military superpower as they suggest?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, both France and Britain have an independent nuclear capability. Many of the other countries, Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Greece, Spain, have a cooperative nuclear capability with the United States. They all have robust defense industries that have been neglected and underfunded, but can expand quickly. And they all have advanced aerospace industries that are capable of shifting rapidly. Say, for example, if they wanted to, do what the Iranians have done and mass produce offensive missiles and rockets, they could do that in a matter of weeks. The main factors underlying European weakness are, first off, the decisions that they've made to focus on building a social welfare state that just cannot accommodate both that and a defense infrastructure. Possibly the issues of the transition to green energy, which undermines a lot of their energy self-sufficiency and makes them dependent on imports of energy, and then just government decisions to pursue a policy of neutrality that assumed time had not moved on from 1989.
Well, David, making the hardware is one challenge, but what about mobilizing the population? Take a look at this chart, and you see that in Europe, the willingness to fight, people were asked if they would be willing to fight for their country. In Europe, only 32% of EU citizens said yes, and that's about the same in the United Kingdom. 41% of Americans said yes, and in the Middle East, 73% would be willing to fight. Now, the red sections show the percentage of people not willing to fight for their country if there was a war. So clearly, Europeans are less willing to fight for their country than in previous years, and when compared to most other regions. Having said that, when we sent our producer out onto the street of London, he managed to find some rather jingoistic Brits.
Well, I'm 70, but I'll have a go. I'm old school. Old
school's good.
I will be there, yeah.
Nice.
Who are we fighting anyway?
I wouldn't want to be in a violent role where I'm doing the action, frontline, anything like that. I'd want to be helping, more supporting in the hospitals, but I would, should I need to.
I say what the UK should do, they should forget about war, they should forget about sending people out to war and actually look at the tax rate.
If it's for something that directly affects the UK and the way we live our lives and what we have here, then potentially, yeah.
Personally, I oppose wars because nobody benefits from it. But there's another part of me that thinks it depends. What are we actually fighting for? Are we fighting for the freedom of others? Are we fighting for the future? I'm not saying that I would support it, but that would be something I'd need to consider.
Yeah, why not? Absolutely. I mean, I think I think a lot of people probably wouldn't, and I understand some reasons why perhaps people wouldn't.
Yes. Straight away.
Yes.
So and next question.
Well, at your
You're
age
challenging me to a fight by any chance, are you?
Richard, clearly, Europeans are less willing to fight for their country than in previous years, and when you compare the EU to other regions, what would account for that?
I think there is an element of the post-war peace dividend here, especially in the western parts of Europe, is that people haven't really faced an existential threat like they have in other parts of the world. If you think in the Middle East, there have been bigger conflicts in recent times that are present in people's memories, but that's not the case here in Western Europe. We don't understand how exceptional things are here and how fragile peace is. So I think we do have to articulate the fact that peace is fragile, and sometimes we have to do things necessary to defend it.
Marko, at the Munich Security Conference, Marco Rubio made the point of saying that the left in all of these countries had been running down their nation's self-image, if you like, by the constant referrals to the sins of colonialism. He also talked about the effects of mass migration on patriotism within these countries. Do you think he's making a valid point there?
I think he is, actually, because patriotism, pro patria mori, as it were, to death, as it were, for the purposes of war, is something you have to be very, very patriotic for. You now have the arrival of many people with entirely different value systems and who've arrived for a better, for a quicker route to a better life, not to a faster death. And they don't see why they should be engaged in this battle between traditional rivals. And to be honest, a lot of patriotic Germans probably don't see that either, especially as if it's the patriotic Germans who go to war, then there'll be even more of a demographic deficit at home that they were complaining about in the first place. So I don't see, I think Rubio's point is valid.
Right.
Definitely.
Right. David, you mentioned you were quite confident that Europe could become a military superpower. We talked about their ability to manufacture hardware. We've talked about patriotism. What about money? Many of them are deeply in debt, and they're going to have to prioritize their spending. Where should they be looking to spend their money?
Well, you know, the Milton Friedman, the economist, said that you can have open borders or you can have a welfare state, but you can't have both. And I think that what we're seeing in most of Europe is that you have a welfare state, and it varies based on some countries, and you have open borders. And I think that this was part of what Rubio was getting at. Eventually, that welfare state and the funnel of people going in seeking state benefits, that's going to have to be constricted in some way in order to make the adjustments needed to have true strategic European autonomy. The challenge is Europe has had the illusion of strategic autonomy because the United States has been funding their defense. I think that Trump probably doesn't intend to terminate that, but I think he's speaking in historical terms when he says this can't go on indefinitely. And I think that the Europeans are wise to wake up to that, even if it takes something ridiculous like an American threat to annex Greenland to bring them to their senses. This is not a quick fix. This is like a generational shift, and it's going to require a whole shift in worldview from what Europe has had really from the post-war period up until now. But I think it is necessary if Europe is going to remain an international player.
Right. And Richard, I know you'd favor drones because you own a drone-making company, but a recent war game simulation showed that drones can wipe out vast numbers of conventional weapons and manpower. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so there was a recent exercise where Ukrainian FPV pilots destroyed, I think it was 2 battalions worth of armor very quickly at the beginning of that exercise. And it just shows how warfare has changed, how low value, readily available drone systems change the dynamic of the battlefield. And you can see this on the Eastern Front in the Ukraine, the fact that it's very, very difficult for people, for the armies, respective armies to move because there's that many drones in the sky hitting high value targets. The dynamics of warfare have changed. And I think that's one thing that we really do need to address as NATO members is how we deal with this asymmetry, the fact that drones have given everybody air power, essentially. It's not the preserve of Western militaries anymore.
Can we just take a look at the leaders of France, Britain, and Germany? They are the least popular in Western Europe. Take a look at this graphic here. So Chancellor Merz, he's the third least popular in Western Europe on a negative 43% net approval rating. Keir Starmer's net approval rating is minus 57%. And Macron, the least popular leader in Western Europe, on minus 63% net approval. Now compare that to the man they all love to sneer at, Donald Trump. Not great, but still far higher than any of them, minus 18% net approval rating. David, doesn't a wartime leader need to command the respect of the country?
Well, Churchill was an extremely polarizing figure when he took the prime ministership over from a failing, discredited Neville Chamberlain. And bear in mind, Churchill didn't come to office as a result of an election. That was a party cabinet shuffle. But I think there's a bigger issue here, which is that with the advent of modern communications and instant news through social media and things like that, I think pretty much every national leader has the potential to be immensely unpopular at any snapshot in time because it's really dependent on a single issue in the way that historically we've never seen before.
Marko, do you think that these leaders are hoping for a bit of a wartime or war preparation bounce in the polls?
I think they are, yes, but it hasn't worked and it's unlikely to work because, for example, Starmer's highly unpopular at the best of times and has it conveys an impression of not really caring what ordinary people think. Here he's trying to bounce those ordinary people into a war by blaming, would you believe, the Russians for cost of living difficulties which he's created himself and which his rearmament program is going to intensify to the nth degree. So everybody knows where he's heading. He's also using Russia as an excuse for his bad politics at home, as indeed are all three. So this is the reality of the reason why they're not going to get a war dividend, because people know what the implications of that are. They're going to be asked to pay for war instead of paying for living in peace, and they're going to be asked to contribute their lives and their wallets in a stupid fool's errand in a country far away, which generally does not want to attack them and has never said it would unless provoked.
Thank you, Marko. Richard, just briefly, you did fight for the British Army in Iraq and Afghanistan. Does it matter who's leading the government?
I think it absolutely does. And this was one of the things that we really did focus on when we were on operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that we were there as professional soldiers to do a job, and we were very separate from government policy, and we kept those separations to enable us to carry on and do our jobs and direct government questions to the government. And I do agree with Marko here that I think politicians in Europe are looking to externalize the domestic issues with focusing on Russia and other global issues. And I think what I'd like to see is more focus on domestic issues. And I think Europeans would like to see that as well.
Let's just flip the debate around and take a look at it from Moscow's perspective for a second. The last time that President Putin addressed the Munich Security Conference in person was in 2007, where he warned the West that Russia had legitimate concerns.
It is obvious that NATO expansion does not have any relation with the modernization of the alliance itself or with ensuring security in Europe. On the contrary, it represents a serious provocation that reduces the level of mutual trust. And we have the right to ask, against whom is this expansion intended? And what happened to the assurances of our Western partners made after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact? Where are those declarations today? Nobody even remembers them.
David Des Roches, you were in the room when Vladimir Putin made those historic remarks. Tell us why they were so important.
Well, basically, it was Putin saying game on. And when you look at what he's done since then, basically trying to reconstitute the Soviet Union, what you've seen is that he laid out the groundwork for that. He laid out his grievances and then said, we're going to do this and take action. At the time, I think that most of the observers there thought that this was aimed at his domestic audience and that it wouldn't have the international implications that it did. So it was kind of one of those signals that was overlooked or just not paid proper attention to. I can tell you that I was in government at the time, and I was reviewing and writing cables from the Secretary of Defense's trip, and that speech did not get a lot of prominence in the cable traffic going back from the Secretary of Defense's trip to the Munich Security Conference.
Marko, what do you think Putin was trying to say there?
I think Putin was trying to say that he'd been watching international law broken with NATO conflict #1, post-Cold War conflicts in Yugoslavia, the bombing of Serbia. Then you had Iraq, again on a false prospectus or WMD. None of it backed up by international law, all of it with very enormous implications for Russia itself, that Russia could no longer be a partner to a game that was being played at its expense and gradually encroaching on its space with obvious consequences, which were flagged up by David's colleagues in various departments of the US state and who all had expertise in Russia and who knew where this would lead. And it's led us to where we are now.
Thank you. And Richard, just briefly, Putin there warning the West. Do you think he was making any legitimate points, and does the West bear any responsibility for this war with Russia and Ukraine?
I would separate the two things out. Does the West bear any responsibility? I think that many of us would agree that we've not focused on defence and security well enough, particularly in Europe, and we've relied too much on the United States. But does that excuse his behaviour in the Ukraine? Absolutely not. And the many people who are losing their lives on the front line doesn't excuse that at all. It's completely abhorrent, and it needs to end.
David Des Roches, Marko Gasic and Richard Gill, thank you all very much for your analysis today. Really appreciate that. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our other episodes, go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.